Rick Carver is engaged in real estate. He takes away people's housing by court order. And he does this almost immediately after such a document is issued. In addition, Rick turns out other real estate frauds to make as much profit as possible. When he came to another debtor, he took out a gun and withdrew himself. He left a wife and children, but neither the deceased nor his relatives. Carver was worried that he needed to vacate the house as soon as possible, which he did as a friendly neighbor. Dennis Snap works as a builder. He knows a lot and does a good job, but in the course of after completing the next project, he finds out that he will not be paid 2 weeks of work down the drain. Everything from the roof to the foundation for nothing. The customer was not given a loan for the construction of a house, and the building had to be curtailed. 2 weeks were wasted, while he has his own loan that needs to be paid. He mortgaged the house, and if he is overdue, he will be taken away for debts. When financial difficulties arose, Dennis turned to the bank, and there they specifically gave him very bad advice. He did not have a spider's nose and he could not recognize the deception. As a result, he did not pay on the advice of bankers. A couple of months later, satisfied bank lawyers went to court. Nash came to the meeting with his son Connor. He tried to explain to the judge how dear this house was to him, and that he was ready to start paying off the loan again, if only they would leave it. But the judge was adamant that he considers a bunch of similar cases in a day, and in each case there is even appealing to the judge's conscience did not help Nash because a child who would be on the street came with him. He should be at school, not here. If we get evicted, he won't be able to go to school. He was given 30 days to appeal or face eviction. Dennis lived with his mother. After telling her about what had happened, he began calling lawyers who could help him for free or for a minimum fee. But he couldn't find a good lawyer. Things weren't getting any better. Things got really bad when Rick Carver and a couple of cops he knew came to him the day after the trial. They helped him evict debtors. Nash tried to explain to him that he still had a month, but Carver didn't care. He had a document in his hand that the house now belongs to the Nash Bank. They were given 2 minutes to collect their personal belongings. Carver's men dragged the rest out into the street in front of the house. At that moment, Connor returned from school. He was horrified by what was happening. Nash had to take his mother and son to a cheap motel, where the same poor devils as him lived. But Dennis was not going to stay here for long. He would find a job and return their house. However, there was a problem with this. They did not want to hire Nash either. In the companies where he called, there were no vacancies, or others arose difficulties when he returned home. He discovered the loss of an expensive tool that he had bought for construction. Dennis realized that the tool had been stolen. One of Carver's workers, he went to the office of this realtor to sort it out and almost started a fight here. At that moment, Carver appeared. He urgently needed people and he offered to help. He agreed to cut down 50 kopecks quickly. When they arrived at the facility, it became clear that 50 kopecks could not get off here. The owners of the house where they went knew that their housing would soon be taken away from them, so they disabled the sewage system. Now all the rooms were filled with shit. Carver's guys did not clean it all out. Zadish got down to business. For $250, he agreed to remove the feces. Rick promised to pay and did not cheat. When I returned to my family with the money, I was pleased. Shortly after that, Carver called Dennis to his house to fix the wiring problems. He did it quickly and Rick realized that this guy could be useful. He offered to work for him. Carver is ready to pay a lot, but he will have to do a lot. As they drove through a residential area, Rick noticed how one of the debtors was stealing water and electricity from a neighboring house from which the tenants had already been evicted. He turned to the landlord to stop doing this. Nash knew this guy. Their children were friends. Moreover, Frank Green was in court the day Dennis was deprived of housing, and he himself could lose the house in the near future. He did not work for Carver on a permanent basis. At first, he simply removed the air conditioners from the arrested houses, as well as pumps for swimming pools. For this purpose, he invited a friend to help him. Without such equipment, it would be more difficult for the bank to sell the house. Carver, in order to make money, received his share of the cash. In addition, he went to the homeowners to inform them that they would soon be evicted. He offered the services of Rick's company, but he was mostly sent far away. Although there were also those who agreed to cooperate, Nash couldn't stand such a job. He had recently lost his home himself, so he perfectly understood those to whom he was talking about the imminent eviction. But he needed money to return his own house, which means he had to step over himself and continue doing what he was paid for. Nash finally saved up enough to try to get the place back when he told Carver about it. Carver suggested Nash agreed to buy out his house and sell it to Dennis in installments. Although they won't be able to return to their apartment for another couple of weeks. To pay off Carver to Dennis, Rick offered Nash a pistol for self-defense, because sometimes you have to deal with completely beaten down owners, but Dennis refused. He was sure he could handle it. And so, when he arrived at his first client for eviction, he was met by the same cops who drove Nash's family out of the house. Together they began to process another debtor. His Dennis felt terrible with his wife and children and tried to soften the moment somehow, but he couldn't do it well. How can you look at me in the mirror? You're sick of sweetening the pill. Returning to your home helped Nash grow up here. Then he had his own son, and he couldn't leave this place. When he brought Connor and Lynn here, they were surprised that the house belonged to them again. After learning that Dennis was being helped by Carver, Lynn became upset. She didn't want to have anything to do with this man. He continued to evict people for debts. He came across different characters. Some were renting and hadn't heard about the impending eviction. Others were too old to figure it all out. So one old man just didn't know where to go because there were no relatives or friends left in this city. The police decided to identify him to the Red Cross and then they would figure it out. With each new eviction, Nash felt worse and worse. They had already tried to attack him. One of the debtors met him with a gun. Well, it's clearer to you that I don't see you here anymore. So Dennis asked Carver for a gun. He was always armed because they often tried to settle scores with him. They constantly called him with threats, but he didn't react to this. His father was a simple construction worker who died at work and the family didn't do anything. I got insurance. Rick fought his way up from the bottom and wouldn't back down until he reached the top. And the top was already looming on the horizon. To cut down a substantial jackpot, you only need to process 100 debtors and then Carver will receive an order for 1,000 houses. With this deal, Nash will receive at least $200,000. Rick advises him to forget about the old house and buy another one. This way he will not only invest money profitably, but also start living in a big way. Nash drove past Frank Green's house to give advice on the future of the trial. He was sure that the judge will rule in favor of the bank and advised to prepare for this in advance. But Green wouldn't talk to Dennis. He despised him because Nash was working with as a Carver. This couple pulled off a lot of illegal frauds. Over time, it stopped seeming reprehensible to Dennis because he was just making money for his family. But they still had to live in a motel, and when they celebrated their birthday, Connor had a new tenant here. He recognized Nash and began to accuse him of eviction from the house. Dennis tried to justify himself by saying that it was not him, but the man remembered him. You don't have a name, and you don't want everyone here to know that he told you some bullshit. All the neighbors that Carver's henchmen and Nash lived next to them began to threaten. Realizing that his loved ones were in danger, Dennis advised them to lock themselves in until he found a place for them to live. Meanwhile, he and Carver had secured a major contract thanks to their machinations and were celebrating by getting drunk. Nash admitted that he was grateful to Rick for the opportunity to earn money. He just didn't know what should he do when he's lost everything. Carver, in Dennis's opinion, had saved him. After receiving the money, Nash bought a mansion and brought his family there. Lynn immediately suspected that the property was bought with money earned from evictions. She did not want to live here. After learning that Dennis had sold their old house, she became angry. Lynn believed that it would be better to move to relatives in another city and to stay in this place. Connor took her side. He did not like the fact that what his father does. Soon Carver started having problems. It turned out that Frank Green could keep his house, and that would set off a chain reaction, and they'd lose a lucrative contract to prevent that from happening. He prints out a forged document issued retroactively and tells Nash to take it to court. After seeing the paper, the judge will deprive the Greens of housing. Dennis arrives at the court but hesitates for a long time to hand over the document. Finally, Carver's friend finds him and takes the envelope himself. As a result, the family Frank Green loses his home. After arriving at the mansion after the trial, he realizes that Lynn and Connor left, and he was left alone, drunk with grief, and woke him up in the morning. Carver should have gone to rent a house. The neighbors have already gathered at Frank Green's house. Familiar cops arrived to help evict the tenants. They talked to a neighbor and found out that Green was a hunter and he might have a gun in his house, but as luck would have it, he left his gun at home when they tried to evict Frank. He broke up, he opened the window and began threatening the police. He was sure that he had been convicted illegally and people could have been hurt. So Nash came forward and confessed that he had indeed delivered a forged document to the court. He said this because he could not do otherwise for reasons of conscience. Realizing that he was right, Green laid down his weapon and surrendered to the police. Dennis was also escorted to a police car and put back in, and Carver was taken into custody, suspecting fraud. Nash sat in the car and watched as the authorities talked to his boss.